We're here at the National Press Club, so we have several variations of this question as well. Is the government spying on reporters right now?
Wow. I hear you laughing. See, here's the dark side. Because there's a whole lot I still have not shared fully publicly, okay? Although I've shared this with 9/11 congressional investigators, and I've shared it with others in Congress when I was still in the government as a senior executive. I've made allusions to it in other public fora. I've written about it. I remember what happened, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? Where instruments of national power were used against reporters. Instruments of national power were used against activists, war protesters, those that became, quote unquote, designated as enemies of the state. Remember, at one point, Daniel Ellsberg himself was declared to be the most dangerous man in America. Okay? I became an enemy of the state. I will tell you, without equivocation, that the surveillance system that was the illegal surveillance system that was put into place after 9/11 and grew from there and came to a huge head in 2004 when James Comey, remember that incident? And if you follow what's going on right now with this documentary on Dick Cheney, very interesting what Cheney is now saying unapologetically, and also what really was going on, because he kept the truth, apparently, from his own president regarding very senior officials and very senior lawyers who were about to resign over the secret domestic surveillance program. Why? Because it was illegal. I will simply tell you that an aspect of that secret surveillance program, called Stellar Wind at the time, I believe it's gone through some name changes since, included surveilling reporters and journalists. Remember, if you've wired the electronic system, it makes it very, very difficult, unless you engage in other means, to get information to a reporter or a journalist. And obviously, if you're concerned about disclosures that they call leaks that are unauthorized, wow, you just keep tap on any and all connections that are made to certain reporters and journalists. And that net just widens. And so I know for a fact that that actually took place in secret. This is no different, but on a much larger scale, than what happened during the 60s and 70s, where they were wiretapping reporters and journalists to find out who their sources were. If you know who the sources are, guess what? I don't really have to go after the journalist directly. I'll just go after the source. So here's really where it gets extremely troubling for me and most disturbing. As a result of my own case, I had contact, and this is another paradox of what happened to me. I went from having gone to one reporter to having interactions with any number of reporters, on and off the record. Any number of them have told me privately, and it's chilling, that even long-time, deep sources in government are increasingly reluctant to speak even off the record, even on deep background. Guess why? They're afraid. You know what it means to become afraid of your own government? Because of just the possibility that they may get ticked off if you happen to have contact with a reporter. Wow. I never imagined that that would truly happen on such a large scale in this country. And yet some of the very best reporters in this country, investigative reporters, are experiencing precisely that. They're being frozen out from their own sources because of fears of the sources have of their own government. Risen himself is part of a criminal case with Jeffrey Sterling because of things that were shared in his book called State of War. He's caught up, subpoenaed 3 times. And the allegations are he's the only eyewitness to the crime. Crime? Oh, wow.
Are you concerned that young Americans are growing up with little sense of privacy, especially electronic privacy, and the implications for privacy rights in the future from that?
I have a son who's 17. Extraordinary son. And we've had long conversations about what happened to me and what's happening in this country. He's only known this world we now inhabit, post 9/11. He knows no other world. Most of us in this room actually remember a pre-9/11 world. At a minimum, I'd like to return to 9/10. The price is way too high, way too high. Our younger generation will inherit what we leave behind. They're the future leaders of tomorrow, today. What legacy will we have them take? What legacy will we leave behind? So one of the fundamental principles of who you are as a human being, which is enshrined in the Constitution, is in the Fourth Amendment, that you are secure. And as much, and I've talked to not just my son, but other young people and people I work with that are in their 20s and early 30s somethings. I've asked them point blank, where do you draw the line? One of them told me recently, I draw the line at the shades of my window. Anything that I do behind those shades is private. That includes the use of his cell phone. That includes any other electronic media. He chooses what he will share that's public. And just because he's private does not give the government license to violate that privacy without due process, which includes probable cause through an affidavit that you have to bring forward in front of someone in an Article 3 court. That the Article 2 powers do not extend to simply subverting what is properly given to Article 3 in the Constitution. Privacy does matter. It's the essence of who we are as human beings. We don't have that, guess what? And so there's something at stake for all of us in terms of the commons. There's something at stake for all of us in terms of fundamentally what it means. It's not their choice, and it's not their right to then turn what is a right of ours into a privilege that they sanction, they control, that they monitor, and they dispense. That's precisely what's happening. And that's precisely a world that I do not want to leave behind for my 17-year-old or any other body in the younger generation or anybody of us. That's not what I took an oath to support and defend. And I say that with about as strong a conviction as I can possibly use in terms of the language. It's that important. It really is that important to who we are. There's this idea that, and I've heard this internally, I heard this when I was at NSA. If you're doing something in private, then you might be up to no good. And we need to have access to that. Did you know there is a plan right now in the Obama administration to provide the intelligence community, which is a misnomer, by the way, the intelligence establishment, access to any and all financial records? Any and all. What the heck is there left to defend? I mean, if you end up taking away the kind of the essence of everything there is about you because there might just be a 1% or a 0.01% chance that you're doing something wrong, what's happening? We're in this pre-crime space where anything is suspicious, that any and all data. I'm telling you, in my case, I was utterly framed. Not only was information mischaracterized, it was misrepresented and at times even doctored. What does that tell you? Because it's all done in secret. They're the ones holding it. You become a target of the government, right? Remember, I've been living this. I've lived this for 5 years. You become a target of the government. It's not a life I want any of you in this room to live, except for those of you who have, in part, lived it. Another thing to share with you, everybody, and I have not said this directly in this type of a forum, but I'm going to say it here. Everybody that was associated with me, either because they used to work for me or had links to me or had ties to me. By mere association assembly, that freedom to do so under the First Amendment, were investigated, were interrogated. And some of those same people lost their jobs and their livelihood because of their association with me. Mere association meant they were guilty. And they were going to be punished because of that association. There's other things I can't even talk about because they're so personal and how far the government went to destroy my lives and others. And yet I stand here as a free person. Free. You know what freedom really means? When you're about to lose everything there is of who you are, that's when you realize what's most important. That's the oath I took. And the president is to preserve, protect, and defend. There's a special oath he takes written in the Constitution. You don't use the color and cover of that to engage in secret law, and interpretation of the law, and withhold what you say is legal from Congress. Congress is the only body that actually gets to legislate, right? Yeah, the president gets to sign into law, and you have the Supreme Court. We forget the foundations of our own country. I have some people, Tom, Constitution is outmoded. You don't understand. We live in a very different era. You know, founding fathers, they had their own contradictions. Yes, they did. Civil War's built into that. I know, I understand all of that. I've heard all those arguments. I used to hear them when I went through SEER training. The very program that was reverse engineered became the torture program. State-sponsored torture by this country. 54 countries minimum have cooperated. What does that tell you about who we are? I was flat out told, Tom, we're different. We're never going to do this because we're Americans. We're Americans. Oh, okay, we're Americans.
We are almost out of time, but before asking the last question, I'd like to remind you about our upcoming speakers. On March 18th, we'll have a speaker's breakfast with Reince Priebus, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, who will discuss the forward strategy of the Republican Party. On March 20th, Kathy Calvin, the president and CEO of the United Nations Foundation, will discuss the public charities' work in supporting the mission and programs of the United Nations. And on March 26th, Robert L. Johnson, chairman of the RLJ Companies, will be our speaker. Second, I'd like to present our guest with the traditional National Press Club coffee mug.
I'll pour a little truth in it and share it with you all. Okay?
And for the final question, you were profiled on 60 Minutes and on The Daily Show, two very different formats. Who would you say did a better job on your story, Scott Pelley or Jon Stewart?
Both.
How about a round of applause for our speaker? Thank you for coming today. We are adjourned.